much, Friday. That was really, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and really big way for the initiatives and for people like me who are just learning and just trying to figure out just the one piece of this. I appreciate the work that you all do. All right, so next we have Cam Howard, Executive Director of Reparations and Media. Well, think about your Slavery Disclosure Act.
I have a assistant today from just the end. Commissioners, anyone here who's working on, anyone here who's working on a municipal state reparations action? I'm the building commission working to assist them. And the reason I'm passing it down is because I didn't bring 30 or 30 plus, and I didn't bring 30. I was saying about 15. So I want to make sure that I get them in the hands of those who are currently doing some actual work in the municipal state. So I'm going to talk about utilizing and defending the segments for the reflex work. That's obvious. First, let me give thanks to Brother Shahern and the organizer of this event. For those very historic words that she uttered. This is an historic moment in the movement, based on what my sister just presented. When Janae came up here, she talked about some of the contentions in the movement, and they're primarily ideological contentions. One group believes this, another group believes that, and having these contentions stopped us from getting further than we are today that we could have been. And so for my sister to express her, well, not just her, but that side of the movement's participation in that contention, and to apologize for it's huge. Yeah. It's historic. I really honor you, sister, for doing that. Thank you. Because there's many people, I chose not to get into the fray. And my organization, COBRA, when I was a leader, at the time, we stated that we would just do the work. We're not going to get into the back and forth. We would just do the work. I think we should have got in earlier to try to mend some of the contention. But in being absent from that, it was allowed to go on longer than what it should have. So I want to apologize too for not coming in quicker with a spirit of unity that we should have. So I want to just throw it out here. So before what happens this conference and bringing in us in dispatch. Really never talk about how just talk about the work. I just want to say something about myself that I think needs to be shared. Well, maybe not. Don't need to be shared, but I'm going to. So I think that I'm the only person in America that goes to involved. In 2017, we decided as a NARC commissioner, actually in 2015, as NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, that we revised the federal legislation, HR 40, changing it from a study bill to a remedy bill. And I was tasked to be the lead writer. The lead writer, takes ideas, draft the document, bring it back, and that document then is edited, things are added or changed, and then final document is presented. So I was tasked to be the lead writer of that. And one of the significant sentences in the federal bill is that the findings of the commission must comport with international standards and full reparations and special measures. That's the most significant line in the entire legislation. Now, at the time, no one knew what full reparations were or special measures, but these are international terms. But now, today, there's a few people in the reparations movement that does not know that there's 5 components of full reparations: the safety, assurances, guarantees, and non-repetition, restitution, compensation, satisfaction, rehabilitation. And that is the standard from which we are basing our repair on across this country. Prior to us introducing the standard of full reparations, white America was telling us our only reparations was education. We'll give you scholarships. And all whites who agreed on reparations, that was the standard. And we say that standard was much too low. All the crimes that have been committed against our ancestors, we needed an international standard. And now the entire movement is based on that standard. And so I'm happy to say that when we wrote that in the legislation, we then went around the country teaching on that particular standard, and now it's common practice. I don't think there's any reparations action that does not lift up that particular standard. And we're demanding that our redress be placed on that standard. Also, when California, Dr. Shirley decided to create her reparations task force, she didn't start from scratch. She took the findings, purpose, word for word from the federal bill, that again I was the lead writer on, and put a California preamble to it and introduced that and passed it. And in that legislation, still that wording, that most significant sentence, that the commission, or in this case, the task force findings must be in alignment with the international standards and full reparations and special measures. So they're attempting to craft legislation now in that regard, and we're looking forward to actually getting that legislation, seeing that legislation passed in the country. Also wrote the Illinois Reparations Commission bill. In Illinois, there's a misnomer that California was the first commission in the state. It's the first minor commission. But Illinois had the Reparations Commission, the Illinois Transatlantic Slave Trade Commission in 2014. They had 2 documents of legislation. They were way ahead of their time. And so when we started to write the Illinois legislation, we didn't do so as we wrote HR 40. What I did was crafted 16 initiatives, proposals, some general, some specific, that the state commission would be tasked to do. They need to do a study. We had already done the study. It was a 10-year-old study, or probably 8-year-old study at that particular time. The Illinois Black Caucus cut those 16 down to 4 and tasked the state commission to just do these 4 proposals, or create proposals around these 4 initiatives. Preserving Black communities, putting vocational training back into our schools. Our children, not all our children are going to go to college for the institution, but they need a trade. They need something that they can take right out of college and begin to build a economic foundation where they can take care of a family. Make sure there's parity in government contracts between Black vendors and white vendors. And the 4th one was to produce a slavery disclosure ordinance, which I'm going to talk about today. I was also instrumental in the New York legislation that passed. I worked with Councilman, State Assemblyman Charles Barron when he introduced his legislation, actually before Dr. Shirley Weber introduced hers, but the California bill was passed first. I worked with him and established that. I worked with Evanston, I wrote the Chicago legislation, and I worked with Evanston in their housing restorative legislation. So the federal legislation in all 3 states that have reparations legislation, as well as the only city that has actually delivered reparations. I worked with Detroit, wrote their initiative, wrote their referendum question that got reparations on the ballot that they initially voted on and passed. So I have been intricately involved at the highest level of reparations in this country when it comes to actual legislation that's been written or passed. And so when I come to you and talk about the State Disclosure Ordinance, I'm coming to you from that perspective. So I'm going to just introduce my comments with that. The average individual who is engaged in this struggle is engaged in the struggle to secure targeted resources from the government, whether it's the federal government, state government, county government, or municipal government. That's generally where we come into this struggle in. But the governments were not the only players in the criminality, in the crimes that were done against our ancestors, from which we are still impacted. If there was no continued impact, then some people say, well, there's really no reparations due because there's no continued impact. But the fact that there's continued impact and that there were crimes committed, that's why we fight and struggle for redress. So the Slavery Disclosure Ordinance is a means and method of getting resources from some of those other complicit actors, right? So what is a Slavery Disclosure Ordinance? So we know about reparations. That's the COVID's definition: repairing, process of repairing, healing, and restoring people who were injured due to their group identity and violation of their fundamental human rights by government, corporation, institution, or individual. So in that definition, there are 4 classes of criminals: the governments, corporations, institutions, and family foundations, right? And all 4 of these classes of criminals are operating in our communities right now today. The government still exists, corporations still exist, the institutions like St. Louis University still exist, and these prominent families still exist. Sure. And in Chicago, the McCormick family, they used to own the Tribune, they used to own Chicago clubs. They still exist. They got about 13 mansions all around the city of Chicago, different family members on. They still exist. In our everyday lived experience, we interact with them unknowingly. So it's not just the government. So how do we address these, what I call non-governmental complicit actors? Some of them are financial institutions, insurance institutions, railroads, textile institutions. Textile is the industry where the cotton was turned into thread and fabric and clothing, and that's how clothing was produced. These textiles, they were all in the north. So where was this cotton going to? It was going to the north, where it clothed all of America. It was going to Europe, where it clothed all of Europe. And Europe, especially Britain, became the clothing exporter of the entire world because they colonized people everywhere. So they took their clothing and stuff everywhere. So Britain, sugar and rice companies, institutions like religious institutions like the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, educational institutions, Harvard University, America's most premier institution. Most people don't know it started as a religious institution, then as a medical school. But in order to attract medical students from across the world, they bought Africans who were dying. When they made it to America, they were dying with what's called the bloody flux, which is a bloody form of diarrhea. They were going to die within 3 months. Not every African who came here lived once they got here. Some of them died immediately after getting on the ship. Some of them were on the process of dying. So Harvard University bought these dying Africans, stuffed their rectums, shipped them up to Massachusetts, and then utilized them to experiment on what they call live cadavers. Now, a cadaver is a dead body. Now, how can you have a live cadaver? But they advertise that so they can get students from all around the world. Now Harvard University is the most prestigious university in the white Western world, next to Oxford and the Louis one in France. But this is how these institutions have been built on the atrocities of our ancestors, and they are profitable at the highest level. And yet, we're still experiencing the tragedy of that process where they enriched themselves from. Because the family I talked about the McCormick family, there was a brother, my sister talked about a family coming from Congo. Congo and Angola were known for their iron expertise. Those 19 Africans that they say came to Jamestown in 1619, they all came from Angola, Congo area. At the time they came, they were about to shut down Jamestown because they could not eat. This country would not even be a country. They were about to pack up and go back to England. But those brothers and sisters had this iron skill that allowed them to create instruments to till the land, and they survived and fed the colonizers, and the rest is history. But there was a brother on the McCormick plantation who was an iron worker who created the mechanical reaper. And this mechanical reaper could do the work of 12 men it would take 12 men to do in one day. They could do in 6 hours, just as one machine. That revolutionized farming in this country and took almost 1 million people out of farming and allowed them to go into the manufacturing that was the emerging industrial revolution. But if it wasn't for the mechanical reaper, that would not have happened. They turned that into the International Harvesting Company. Some of you may have heard of that as one of the major manufacturing companies of farm equipment in the world, but often African invention. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And these are the type of things that are going on in our midst every day. We're not targeting these companies. There's a railroad I'm gonna stop. Just go through this. There's a railroad that I targeted in Illinois and Chicago in 2014. Utilizing the slave disclosure process, that they wanted 103 lots that the city owned that they wanted to buy so they could expand their rail yard. And in order for them to expand their rail yard or to buy this property, they had to file a slave disclosure ordinance. And when they did so, we got it and we read it and we said, okay, now we're going to organize against them. At the time, they were an $8 billion corporation. We were not able to get what we wanted, but we, quote unquote, forced a string of concessions. But we were not able to get we didn't have the right leadership, political leadership in the city. 1 month after they sold the land to this corporation, their stock went up from $77 a share to $114 a share. They added $3 billion to their net worth in 30 days. From 8 billion to 11 billion in 30 days. Today, 10 years later, they're a $58 billion corporation. Let that number sit in. 11 billion or 58 billion, and they gave our community $20,000. Type of crimes that are being continually committed by these institutions in our community. So we have to find a way also to go after them. And if it's the cities, you had a question. And if it's the cities, these reparations commissions that can help us do that. So I'm gonna shoot do the rest of these because I don't know how much time we got. Sure. So what is the slave disclosure ordinance? It's a city or state or county law that says that any corporation, institution that wants to do business with the city, they have to research their historical records and find out if there's been any complicity, profit, etc., from the enslavement process. And if there is, they have to disclose that to the municipality. So it documents the extent of their complicity, identifies offending parties, and there's various forms of disclosure that they're required to do. Now, currently, there's about 5 states that either have or had slave disclosure ordinances. And at one time, there's about 20 entities overall. So cities like Chicago was the first city in 2022, Berkeley, San Francisco, Richmond, Los Angeles, Oakland. Those are 5 cities in California, in the state of California. California also had a slave disclosure ordinance. Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Wayne County, and Cleveland. And there's a couple others. So what we did when we decided to craft this new, what we call slave disclosure and redress ordinance, I looked at all of the slave disclosures that existed, took the best parts out of all of it, and then crafted what I call the modern slave disclosure ordinance. And we wanted to introduce a new era of slave disclosures that also included redress as a mandatory component, because none of the other ordinances actually had redress as a part of it. They just had the disclosure component. And so there's some challenges and opportunities in this. The challenges with existing ordinances, there was no enforcement mechanism. Even though these laws are on the books in cities and states, that wasn't enforcing. And there was no mandate for redress and some of the other legal challenges that we had to deal with. So we have the challenges of amending the existing ones or introducing new slave disclosure ordinances. And that's also an opportunity that we have right now that we can both amend if there's on the books and introduce new legislation. And that's what we're attempting to do right now. As I began to do the work around the slave disclosure ordinance, I got a call from Evanston's attorney. And he said, well, there's this law firm that wants to do some work around reparations pro bono. Why don't you talk with them? So I talked with this law firm. It's Aaron Fox Schiff. It's a major law firm in the nation. They operate out of the Willis Tower, which is the tallest building in America. It's called the Sears Tower in Chicago. But they have offices all around the country. They're in the top 10% of law firms in America. And when they contacted me, I said, well, I know exactly what I want you to work on. I want you to work on this slave disclosure piece with us, because there's no targeting of these entities. Everybody's still focused on the government. He needs a piece of legislation that can mandate redress. And so about 6-8 months into this process, I found out that Howard University out of Washington, D.C. were also looking at slave disclosures. And so we teamed together, these 3 groups, my organization, Reparations United, the law firm of Aaron Fox Schiff, and Howard University School of Law. We came up with a model reparations, slave disclosure, and redress ordinance. The key difference with our ordinance is greater disclosure, detailed compliance measures, so it details how these corporations, institutions must comply with the ordinance. There's a mandatory redress component. In looking at slave disclosure ordinance in the past, Oakland had the strongest. Oakland probably, I'm not gonna say the strongest, it had the most detailed order, Oakland and Los Angeles. But Oakland had a component for redress that was voluntary redress, that a corporation could voluntarily contribute to a fund. And in the 10-12 years of this life, not a single corporation has voluntarily committed to anything. So we can't leave it to them to volunteer, right? We got to make it mandatory. So that's what we did. We made it mandatory. So we took Oakland's language and we made it mandatory, but then we put a civil enforcement mechanism into it. Oakland also said that any citizen can bring complaint. Yeah. No other slave disclosure ordinance had that language in it. That I could say, no, I know, I've done the research. I know that corporation. I know that family is complicit in the crimes against my ancestors. I know for a fact. Now you must either halt that contract or force them to comply. That's the civil enforcement component. It don't exist anywhere except in Oakland. And so it exists in this particular restored and redress ordinance that we've instituted. How do we implement it? We can implement it as a standalone ordinance, or we can implement it within the purview of this commission or task force. That's why I want to make sure that everyone who's on the commission and task force has this toolkit. Or it can be implemented, if you don't have a commission in your city, you can go to an alderman or councilman or state rep and say, we want to introduce this this legislation by itself. But if you have a commission, you can put it within your commission. Like Illinois, they have four mandates only. Preserving Black communities, vocational training, parity and contracts, and slavery exposure ordinance. That is their 4 mandates. And we presented this last month, the team, to the Illinois legislature, to the Illinois commission, and they're ready to run with it. They've been established for 2 years and haven't did anything on any of the board. So we put in about $60,000 worth of work on this particular legislation and say, here, we've done the work for you. All you have to do is create the guidelines for it and implement it. And there we talked with all of the Black caucus, and they're all really excited about getting this. So we should be having something within Illinois within the next, they'll be introduced in January at the next legislative assembly. But that would be a model for the rest of the country. But you don't have to wait until Illinois do it. That's why you have this toolkit right now before you, something you can begin to do yourself. Right. So in defending, there's some potential legal challenges, and that's why we created this toolkit. So there's 3 areas of the disclosure ordinance. There's the disclosure component, there's the contribution component, and then there's the actual directing the funds toward particular remedies. So there's the disclosure, contribution, and the remedy component. So we looked at the legality in each of those areas. And so lawyers created this toolkit, it's a legal toolkit that has the actual legislation that we have, the model legislation. You can use our legislation, you can create your own legislation. It has the do's and don'ts in these 3 areas. When crafting your disclosure language, you want to make sure you do this and don't do that. When crafting your contribution language, your mandatory redress, you want to make sure you do this and you don't do that. When crafting your proposals to address the continued impact of the injuries, you want to make sure you do this and you don't do that. One of the major things you don't want to do is use race. We use descendant of enslaved Africans or the language, American descendant of enslavement, US, right? Vegas, descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, but we don't use race as a component, and we don't use it as a punitive measure. We're not trying to punish. We can't say we are punishing them because that would be unconstitutional. But we're giving them an opportunity to engage in good corporate citizenship. Giving them opportunity to help repair some of the injury that they caused in the past. And so this is the spirit that we have to engage in. And I'm not going to continue because we get past the time. So this is the toolkit. Again, it's a document prepared by Howard University, Movement Lawyering Clinic, Reparations United, and the law firm of Aaron Fox Schiff. Again, probably over $60,000-$70,000 worth of research and hours have been put into producing this document. It's shared all around the country. We want every municipality and state in this country, in this union, to have some type of mechanism that bring these other criminals to justice. Thank you. Yeah. If you have any more,
Wait, I want to make a little quick point. An example of St. Louis University.
we have,
And that's what I put here, oh, now, a long time ago, stuff like that, right? That's what I get a lot. And so when I make this, when I'm doing my video for television. St. Louis University, okay, one is central to the founding of it. The Jesuits and my ancestors. Even today, the leadership of St. Louis University made the Jesuits a priority. They are part of their 5-year strategic planning. Just in 2021, when I met with the president of SLU, while they were telling me, oh, we're not ready for reparations, at that same time now, the Jesuits, these were not those who founded this institution, they're the successors. They fundraised in a year and a half and built them a $26 million, 20-bedroom, 5-guest bedroom residential facility for the faculty Jesuits on the campus. So they have room and board on the campus. So we asked, why is it that the Jesuits, like the chair of African American Studies, he's a professor there, he doesn't have room and board on that. Why is it that they get it? It's because of their historical ties to the institution. So when they want to make you feel like you belong, and when they want to fundraise and use their resources for you, they can.